So my name is JJ Uyesugi. My pronouns are they and them. And I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator at the Japanese American Service Committee, or JASC, here in Chicago, Illinois. And on behalf of JASC, I'd like to thank you all for joining us tonight. And a big thank you to our panelists for sharing their time, stories, and perspectives. I'd also like to thank Emma Saito Lincoln, JASC's Legacy Center Director, who's helping behind the Zoom scenes to keep everything running. And if you aren't familiar with JASC, we're a 501c3 nonprofit that was founded in 1946 to support the needs of the Japanese American community in Chicago, rooted in the World War II legacy of forced removal and incarceration. This organization has worked for 75 years to foster community, preserve history, celebrate culture, and care for our elders. In addition to programs like tonight's, we provide language classes for children and adults, a variety of cultural heritage classes and community events, and we offer both on-site and in-home support services for aging adults. If you want to stay updated, please sign up for our twice monthly email newsletter and follow us on social media. And those links are coming in the chat. Also, if you value the work we do and you're in a position to do so, we'll hope you consider making a donation to ensure that we can continue to fulfill our multi-pronged mission. And that link will be in the chat as well. Tonight's program will consist of hearing individual introductions from each panelist, and then panelists responding to a few rounds of questions I'll be asking. And in the last 15 minutes or so, we'll open up to questions from the audience. We encourage you to type your questions into the chat while the panelists are speaking, and we'll probably save them until that end audience question portion. And at that time, you can also use the raise hand reaction to ask a question verbally, and please wait to be called on before unmuting yourself. Before we get started, I also quickly want to plug the OKAIRI 2021 virtual conference, which is taking place November 12 to 14. This will be an online gathering, an opportunity for LGBTQ plus Nikkei, supportive family members, and allies from around the world to gather and build community. And for this panel, I really wanted to just kind of learn more about the experiences of Nikkei, or Japanese American people in Chicago, who understand themselves in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer universe in some way, and about people's experiences kind of growing up in different times. And this is definitely not representative of all the experiences of all Chicago LGBTQ Nikkei. And I think sharing these experiences is really important. And with that, we'll get started. So I feel like I could really listen to each of these people share for an hour and a half each. So it feels like this will be really short, but I'm super excited to have Roy Wesley, Marlene Serikaku, Danielle Tanimura, Ann Watanabe, and Tai Yamamoto here. And I have been talking for a long time, so I'll have them introduce themselves. Please share your name, pronouns, any labels you identify with that you want to share, and how long you've been in Chicago. And we'll start with Roy.
Hi, thank you, JJ. So my name is Roy Wesley, and the last name is somewhat problematic in that it was given to me by my father, but he is Japanese American and he's now deceased, but his Japanese name, family name, has been Uyesugi, Uyesugi, over the cedars. And it's an ancient samurai name. And when he changed the name, his parents were not that pleased, but he took Wesley because it was John Wesley who was the founder of the Methodist Church. And he thought, oh, well, they couldn't object, but they did. But it also indicates something about the time, because I was born on the day of my family's incarceration into the Portland Assembly Center during World War II. And the sentiment against Japanese Americans at that time was very high. And when you live under the circumstances that my parents did during the war, you realize that being Japanese was not a favorable position to be in. Being surrounded in Portland by a very majority white population. And so there's a book called Covering, which discusses this whole issue of all of the mechanisms that people use to hide their identity. And I think that was part of it, but he had very practical business reasons that he went through in his own mind for the name change. But this is something that happens to all of us when we feel discrimination, I think. And when I was born, I had no idea, of course, about what had happened. In my I wrote a biography of my dad's life and his accomplishments. And I began to understand more about his position and why he did what he did. And it was a difficult thing to come to reckon with, because there's now a greater understanding of the time and the period of what happened. But anyway, that's all part of a background, which didn't mean to take up so much time about that, but that'll be my intro.
Thank you, Roy. And I'll pass it over to Marlene.
Hi, I'm Marlene Serikaku. I've lived in Chicago all my life. I really don't know what else to say. I've been here forever. I don't really plan on going anywhere. I don't know, a little background. My mother's Japanese. My father's Caucasian. Mother came from Hawaii. Father came from North Carolina. They met in Japan. And I just have one sibling. My partner and I have a son. He's 13. And that takes up most of our time. I was very involved in a lot of sports earlier on in the gay community. And I was married to a man before, and then came out during that marriage. So it was a bit difficult. And that's really it in a nutshell, if I can say that.
Yeah, thank you, Marlene. I'll pass it to Danielle.
Hi, I'm Danielle Tanimura. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a Yonsei. I'm also mixed. My dad is Japanese American. My mom is Jewish. I was born and grew up in Chicago, and in the house we're in is the same house that my grandparents bought after they came out of camp, so back in the 50s, and grew up in a 4-generation household. Live here now with my partner and our 4-year-old daughter, who I'm at home with and who keeps me busy all the time. I used to be a full-time judo sensei, running around the city teaching judo, kind of family tradition carrying on, as well as a visual artist, but I'm pretty busy these days. So also identify as transgender and queer, and do have some history with Japanese American Service Committee working in the Legacy Center. So it's nice to be here with everybody today.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Anne?
Hey, I'm Anne. I go by she and her, and I'm Shinise on my mom's side. So my mom's from Tokyo, and then I'm Yonsei on my dad's side. My dad's family is Japanese Canadian. I grew up kind of moving around a lot, so mostly on the East Coast, but I was actually born in Illinois and lived in Urbana until I was 7. And I've been in Chicago for, I think, about 6 years. Oh, and
Do you have one more thing to say?
no, that was it.
And we'll go to Ty.
Alrighty. Hi, my name is Tai Yamamoto. I use he, him, his pronouns. I've been in Chicago for, I guess, 5 years now, which feels longer than it actually has been. I've been fairly involved in the Japanese American community in Chicago for the past couple of years. Currently, I work at the Japanese Culture Center, doing both origami classes as well as a lot of the event planning and administrative side of things. I am Yonsei on my dad's side, and I am actually I believe third generation Chinese American on my mom's side. I believe they're both on the call, so they can correct me if I'm wrong. But I'll keep this short. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you, Ty. Thanks everyone for those kind of quick introductions. And I know we started to get into a little bit of this in some of the introductions, but wanted to ask our panelists, like, how do you spend your time and what's most important to you these days? And anyone can jump in, or I'll start calling some people.
Okay, I'll jump in because everybody's shy. I'm shy too, but so I spend my time as a writer and a scientist. I've been in Chicago, well, all my whole life after leaving the incarceration period during the war. So growing up in Chicago has been a part of my basic fabric in life. I didn't know that I was gay until I was, well, I probably knew I was gay when I was very young. I mean, kind of remembering back to when I used to watch Superman and fell in love with his tights. But so that's pretty early. But, you know, the circumstances around growing up in the time period that I did, you conform to the social norms. And, you know, even then I knew it was not the right thing to talk about. And my brother used to ask me, well, don't you get a funny tingling feeling when you see naked women? And I thought, oh God, no, not me. But I would never say that. It was something that the culture instills in us. So you know that what's considered right and wrong. So I grew up hiding that and conforming to the family standards, and dated women, and eventually ended up marrying a woman and having children, 2 boys. And then doing the much harder task later of coming out and realizing that I had to express who I really was. And that part of my life was traumatic, as it is for many gay period, you know, going through that period of depression, questioning, wondering, suicidal thoughts, because you don't know what's right or wrong or up and down. It's just a very confusing time period. But fortunately, I survived that and came out fine. And became a scientist. I was a molecular biologist, and I worked at Pfizer on the East Coast for a number of years, and then came back to Chicago to help out with my family's business. But anyway, so that's kind of my beginnings and how I spend my time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Roy, and thanks for sharing a little bit about what it was like to kind of come out and deal with like the questioning that you were doing. Who wants to jump in next?
I suppose I can jump in a tiny bit. These days, you know, it's been pretty busy for me. I split my time between a few different jobs. I mentioned the Japanese Culture Center, but I suppose I primarily consider myself a filmmaker in the Chicago community. And I think in terms of what's important to me, I think obviously the identities that we're talking today are things that I really try and talk about. If not in the films I've currently created, at least in the films that I would like to create, and in some of the projects that I would like to work on in the future. I think that we're in a unique point in history where we can not just focus on one thing, but we can talk about all these different identities that we have, Nikkei identities and queer identities, and we're able to like show them in a way that helps people understand or tells our stories. And that's just a little bit about what I do. I'm not sure if anybody else wants to jump in and say something else.
I'll just say a little bit. All we do is work, and we attend our son's activities, driving him there or here, there, everywhere, and just, you know, showing up for soccer and baseball and everything else. My son is half Japanese. We did get some sperm from California, and so he's half Japanese, and he's pretty aware of it. And I try to, my little background of being Japanese in the culture, I just try to do whatever I can to expose him to as much of that as possible. So, you know, I notice he's starting to use certain words, you know, that we always used when we were sort of growing up, but, you know, not speaking the language or anything, but just having certain words that we use, you know, so our time is his time.
Yeah, I can jump in on that. Just yeah. So what I spend my time mostly these days is like I said, I stayed home with our kiddo, who's a daughter who's 4.5 now, and she's amazing, but lots of work, and especially the last couple of years, you know, we've been homeschooling, which was the plan before, but with COVID and everything, that made it much more, you know, seem much more practical and important. But and similarly, you know, we haven't been able to go out and do been really missing all the cultural events, whether it's, you know, going to Pride or going to JSC or MBT, the Midwest Buddhist Temple, BTC, you know, Buddhist Temple Chicago, or Tri-C Church, whatever, for all the festivals. We haven't been able to really give the kiddo a feel for community physically, you know, being places, which is its own struggle right now. But, you know, definitely missing out on, you know, teaching judo classes like I used to, getting to work with the next generation of kids, not just mine, you know, which is its own challenges. But yeah, and just, you know, appreciate being able to, even though we're, you know, not being able to do everything, you know, growing up with my parents just upstairs, she's growing up same as I did, with access to her history and learning about, you know, the culture as much as she can absorb, you know, living as we do, with lots of Zoom and screens and stuff. But you know, it's and with the time I spent at JSC working in the archive, you know, you know, studying that I did in college and afterwards, worked on a couple of documentaries and museum installations for Japanese American community here, and, you know, just working to preserve that past so that future generations have access to it. So yeah.
I can go. So for my day job, I'm a nurse. I work at Advocate Trinity Hospital, and then I also work part-time at the former Mercy Hospital, which is now called Insight. There was like an attempt to close the hospital last year, and then there was sort of a big community fight to save it, and now we're in this weird limbo where we're kind of open but kind of not. But yeah, outside of work, I also organize with Nikkei Uprising, and I feel like a lot of the work that we do is about connecting Japanese Americans with present day struggles against incarceration and systems of incarceration, and kind of seeing, like, building those connections and those relationships. And yeah, I think, like, you know, also just getting through the day to day during this pandemic is sometimes super hard. And so just, yeah, want to like put out that, like, you know, that's like a way that I feel like we've all been spending our time over the past year or two, is just kind of like getting through life and figuring out, yeah, just like what life over the past year and a half has looked like.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Something is wrong with my Zoom, so I can't see anybody. But so yeah, please tell me if I need to know something that's going on. But thank you so much for sharing about things that are important to you. And yeah, it's good to have a sense of people's lives a little bit. And the next question, sorry, I have an echo and I don't know how to get rid of it either. So this is just Zoom life right now. What do you value about being queer and or Japanese? And anyone can jump in.
Okay, I'll jump in. So I'm sorry that I'm going to borrow some of the words that we talked about earlier prior to this call. But I think that there's one of the things that a lot of us talked about in terms of valuing was just the freedom that comes with not just being queer and not just being Japanese, but with having both of these identities, and they're not necessarily being like a set path or one expectation for what we all have to be. It really is it's a challenging opportunity, but it's a challenging thing, of course, to have both these identities and to navigate them without having much solid ground. But there's also a freedom in creating your own path and not necessarily needing to stick to one idea or needing to be one thing. We're really able to kind of create our own futures in a way that feels different and unique. And I admit I feel like I may be on the younger side of this panel, and I feel like there's a lot of things that I am still learning about both identities. But for me, that it's just a lot of at the current moment a lot of hope, especially getting to work with so many of these radical groups in Chicago, like Nikkei Uprising that Anne mentioned earlier. There's just so many new things happening, and so much at least a lot of hope that I feel at the current moment, even in light of everything that is always happening within the community. There's a lot of things that I really value and look forward to continuing.
Thanks so much, Ty. Let's see.
Okay, I'll jump in. So being Japanese and being queer is something that I grappled with, I guess, for a long time before settling down into realizing this is who I am. And thankfully for the gay pride movement, that it gave me the background to be able to go forth in the world and say, declare that that's who I am. And I found my Japaneseness also late in life, because growing up the way that I did in Portland and early in Chicago after the war, my family was pretty much isolated from the Japanese community. And as a child, I would look in the mirror and kind of wonder, well, how come I look the way I do? And then all my friends and everybody around me don't look like me. Of course, I don't know what they thought of me, but you know, I was obviously different from all of the white kids around me. So learning to accept myself for who I am was a long struggle. But once that was accomplished, there was, as Ty said, this enormous freedom to be, just to be who you are. And the question now today, I guess, is we can accept ourselves for who we are, but will other people accept us in the same unquestioning, uncensoring way? And the answer to that is actually no. And that's why there's a lot of work to do. I've been working with Lambda Legal for a good number of years. I was on the board for 7 years and chairman of that board. I was on the SAGE board, which supports seniors who are LGBTQ. And there's so much more work to be done, given all of the negativity that still exists out there. But I think our goal is to reach a world where we don't have to do this anymore, that we can just be the people who we are without labels. I mean, we need the labels now, but I envision a world later without them.
Thanks so much, Roy.
I can go next. Yeah, just kind of following that. Something about, you know, growing up Nikkei and queer. Something that I value with both is just that same strength that people have been talking about so far from both communities, where you have this really strong foundation of generations coming before you who have, it's kind of like, you know, out in the open, at least, that we have struggled through something as a community in the past and have, you know, rallied to create resources to depend on ourselves and only ourselves most of the time to fix to try and overcome whatever's challenges of that day, you know. And that's true for the queer community, and it's true for the Nikkei community, you know. And especially, you know, for me growing up, my grandparents, great grandparents, you know, living through camp and being able to just talk about it, it's like, and you know, the community resources that help them figure out how to make it through the world. You know, same thing happened when, you know, finding my place in the queer community, meeting those people that, and spaces that give you the strength to be who you are, you know, take your place in the world, have a sense of yourself, and then go on to help other people. So it's what I value about being in both communities.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Anna or Marlene?
Yeah, thanks everyone. I feel like what's been shared so far definitely really resonates. Yeah, I think similarly, like I really value how I feel like queerness has expanded kind of my idea of what's possible, or like what I can go after or want in life. And there is sort of this culture, this mentality of, you know, if a thing doesn't exist yet, like let's create it, or just kind of cracking things open and looking at them and questioning them. That I feel like I've gotten from queer community and kind of witnessing people like creating, you know, alternative family structures or like different structures of intimacy or that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there's something, you know, that I've gotten from that around just being able to like kind of not that, you know, like the things that you're told that you just have to accept for granted in our society, whether that's like you're supposed to go marry a man and have kids and that will make you happy, or whether that's like, you know, like there are people in cages and that's just how our society is and it can't be any other way. Um, yeah, I feel like I've just, Queerness has like helped me, like push me in the direction of like, okay, like let's actually look at that and figure out like what do we actually want and fight for that thing. And yeah, I guess I'll just also say around being Nikkei and being Japanese that like um I really appreciate just yeah, like how it's connected me to a sense of rootedness and like understanding, like connecting to the community here in Chicago has helped me understand how I'm part of a larger community and a larger lineage when it comes to like social justice work and political work, and especially like having community to unpack, you know, all of the like complicated dimensions of Japanese American identity, and then kind of struggle through that together with and, you know, define like what our history means to us. That's been really valuable also. Um, yeah, and I really appreciate that. I think I was first welcomed into this community as an LGBTQ person through through the Tri-C Church and through like some of the work that Elaine and JJ were doing, collaborating around, you know, creating a support space for LGBTQ API people that was being hosted at Tri-C.
Thanks, Erin. Marlene, did you want to share?
Well, talking about the queer community, when I came out, it was sort of a godsend for me because I didn't realize or know that I would have a community like that. That when I, you know, got divorced and I sort of left the Japanese community behind because of, you know, I didn't really know how to deal with them, and I was concerned with my parents and how people would look at them. And but there's such a very strong, or there was a very strong gay community in Chicago. Yeah, Halsted Street. I mean, there were lots of bars. At that time, there were lots of women bars too, but the bars, the women's bars at that time, they weren't all like you just go and you drink and you pick people up and stuff like that. Some of them were very also sort of community oriented and did other things. Um, you know, get a bus and go to the Cubs game and, you know, things like that. So, um, you know, there was, I don't know if I should tell my parents' dance story now, but there was a
Go for it.
very, I'm sorry?
Go for it.
Oh, there was a bar. It was called Paris Dance. It was on Montrose, and we would go there all the time because it wasn't a pickup bar. It was just a place to hang out, to have fun, to be yourself. They had a parking lot, which was really convenient. Anyway, so we would go there all the time during the week. On the weekends, we danced, and so I knew the owners, I knew all the bartenders, and excuse me, one year for Pride, they had a Paris float, and they asked me to be on the float. And I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be on the Paris float. Like, you know, I just thought I was like queen for a day, if you want to put it that way. But when I actually got on the float, I realized that I was also scared. And I wasn't, I would think I was a little bit scared for myself, but I was really concerned with my parents. You know, my parents went to a Japanese church, they were in the Japanese community, And I was like, oh my God, if somebody sees me on TV and they go up to my parents and they say something like, what are my parents going to say? And it could, because at that time I wasn't out to my parents also. So Paris had these visors. So I put the visor on, I had some sunglasses. So I was like on the float excited, but I was also in disguise, you know? And I was just like, you know, there's TV cameras everywhere. And oh my God, just my parents don't know. And if somebody says something to them, I just didn't know how they were going to deal with it. And it scared me to death to be on that float. But at the same time, I was like, damn it, I'm on this float. I'm part of the community. I'm part of this, the bar that we always go to, that we know people. And one of the things, we were going to the bar all the time. And in the wintertime one year, they had opened a little like snack place where you could get food. And I had suggested to the owner and the bartenders that in the wintertime, they serve hot sake. And you know what? They served hot sake. So you could get hot sake if you wanted, or a drink, regular bar drinks. And so we would always go in and have some sake all the time in the wintertime when we were there. But yeah, it was an exhilarating and terrifying experience all at the same time, being on that float.
Yeah, but thank you so much, Marlene. And thanks everyone for sharing. I feel like I really resonate with the kind of authenticity things that people shared about the freedom, kind of community aspects, and then also like imagining, and yeah, imagining like what are the kind of things that we want, and the next question is a little bit more about challenges, although I think in all of your answers, like there were the challenges woven in with the I guess good stuff or stuff you value as well. So yeah, the next question is, what has been challenging about being queer and or Japanese?
It's a big subject, and it goes back historically for so long, back into the 1800s. When you think about what the Chinese and the Japanese who first came to the United States had to experience and be challenged by. And of course, the challenges of being queer are well known, going back to Oscar Wilde and everything, and even before that. But so we built on top of all of those challenges. But I think that the major challenge today is the anti-Asian sentiment that's come up both politically and culturally now in our society. And for me, being a senior person who has to walk around when I go out for my walk or run in the neighborhood, I do grab a mace because my husband said, well, you got to protect yourself one way, and didn't want me going out without some kind of protection. So I have my pepper spray always with me. And I think that's crazy to have to worry about that kind of a situation. Or when you see the videos of poor senior ladies being knocked over by some ruthless thug. And for whatever reason, whether they're psychopathic or not, it's just not right to have those kinds of things happening in our society today. And it has to stop. And we can only stop it by creating more awareness, by having a police force that's active and not afraid to interfere, which is another problem today in our current culture in cities. There's just so much work, it seems, to be done, and these are challenges. I mean, not only just being a Japanese American, but being queer, where you can get queer bashed. So I think these are definite problems that we face, and I just hope that soon all of that will dissolve.
Yeah, thank you so much, Roy, for sharing that. And I know that it is really, I guess, the kind of heightened visibility of anti-Asian violence and anti-Asian, oppression is really, it's really daunting right now. Anyone else want to share about challenges?
I can share a tiny bit. I think my story is sorry, I lost some thought for a second. I connecting back, I guess, to what I was saying earlier, the flip side of having the freedom to be whoever you want to be and not having a guidance as both queer and Nikkei people is that there's also a very isolating aspect to it, that there's not necessarily any one thing that we have to be. Because of that, there's many times where I think we feel very alone, or I think there's often times where it feels like the community can be hard to find. I mean, in the 5 years that I lived in Chicago, I'm very fortunate that I've been able to find a community so fast within the past, I would say, like 2 years. Whereas I'm sure this has not always been the case in history. Chicago has such a vibrant community right now that I've been lucky, but it can be really difficult to one, feel like you're a part of a community that's so specific, and two, to kind of understand what it means to be part of that community and what it means to have both these identities and every other identity that one could have. I'm rambling a little bit, so I apologize, but there's just a real there's a sense of confusion at times for me, both in the sense that I, as a fourth generation Japanese American, what does it mean to kind of connect back to my culture? What does it mean to connect to my heritage? And similarly to that, it's I feel like I didn't spend much of my childhood or much of my adolescence connecting with other queer people necessarily, or connecting with other queer community members, and trying to find it's that struggle of with both these identities. You kind of want to push them out at a young age, especially when you're told not to be gay, when you're told, when you experience anti-Asian hate, you kind of train these things out of yourself. And so I feel like there's a lot of reconnecting that, even though I'm only in my 20s, there's still a lot of reconnecting I feel like I've had to do in the past year to feel like part of both these communities. That's kind of the main thing that I've struggled with. Of course, I'm much more fortunate to live in a much more tolerant time, and a much more in an era where there's a lot less discrimination and hate, but there's still, I think, always challenges that we're always going to face, just as queer people and as Nikkei people. There's so many things that just that we all have to struggle through as a community.
For me, when I came out, I was very afraid of not finding community, because I had come from one community and leaving all that behind, and I was, I was worried. But because I played sports, there were lots of gay leagues, and I joined gay leagues, and I played basketball and volleyball and softball, and that's where I met all my friends that I still have today. And you know, that really gave me a sense of relief that Chicago does have a very strong and big, at that time, community, and also finding like Horizons at that time, which is now the Center on Halsted, going there and finding and volunteering and doing things there. Also, my community started getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and unfortunately, there wasn't a lot, and I don't ever remember seeing a lot of just Asian people at all. And it could have been the times, people are afraid to come out and to participate and be seen, you know. And then as you get older, you're kind of just like, well, you take it or leave it. If you don't, if it bothers you, then that's okay. It's who I am, and you can keep walking, so to speak. But the community here in Chicago and really did help me to settle back in and sort of feel that I had a space where I could be myself and participate in things and not have to hide and all of that. So I was really grateful that the gay community here was had its arms open for me.
Thank you. Danielle, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, yeah, the I guess challenges, struggles. Yeah. So I guess I knew, I was something, different when I was about 4 years old. First time really, knowing that I was transgender, but there wasn't really a word for that at the time growing up in the 80s. So, you know, it's just something that I felt about myself. I knew something was different about my identity, who I was, but you just have to keep going, figure things out. Similarly, growing up, being just mixed race in general, but also Japanese American, while at a time where the, you know, Japanese community is still there, but it was after lots of people had left to the suburbs from Chicago, and I'm still here in what was Japantown here on the north side, but there's not as many of us here as there used to be. So there was a lot of searching for myself, trying to figure out what my feelings really meant and what there was even what I could even do about it, to find who I was and get there. And it wasn't till, I didn't meet another trans person until I was in college or after that. You have to really work to find the people, and then it's like coming out to people, process of, getting all of the paperwork going to meet the doctors and see the counseling so that you can get access to medicine to allow you to be yourself. There's just so much red tape and so many roadblocks, and forget about the part where you actually come out and socially transition. Luckily the first person I came out to was my future wife, who I met way back in college, and then slowly over the years coming out to more people, and there are challenges along the way with that, but feel lucky with the support we've had. Was able to have life, have my family still with me. I didn't lose my job teaching judo to kids. I thought that would be something I'd lose by coming out, but luckily the community rallied in full support. Being able to, the rare thing of still having my family and them supporting me as well, that's such a rare thing, and I wish it wasn't. And the same thing that keep hearing, that the quality here about trans people having to be strong, or that we are strong. And the real thing is, it just takes a lot of strength for all of us to be out and to be here. And I wish it didn't take so much strength and sacrifice to just exist, that people could just be themselves. You know, I'm hoping for that for the future.
Yeah, thank you so much. It really, yeah, it really shouldn't take that much to just exist. Thank you. And do you want to share?
Sure. Yeah, I guess I'll just say that, you know, I think like I've had in many ways a pretty privileged experience of queerness, just partly because of like generational things and, you know, just my circumstances and identity and privilege things. And so my struggle was mostly sort of internal. Like it took me, if anything, I feel like I found the community first, but it took me a long time to figure out that I was queer. And so, you know, I always kind of felt like I was queer on some level, and I was always hanging out with queer people since like I was a teenager. Um, but like for a long time, I was pursuing, you know, I think I really used like sex and relationships in this very disconnected sort of way, like almost as an addiction or as a form of escape. And so, because I found it the easiest to do that with cis men, you know, it created a lot of confusion for me about my like sexuality and about my queerness. And so I had to kind of do a whole layer of like personal healing before I could fully connect with my queerness or connect with that part of myself. But yeah, I did have like a lot of confusion about that for a long time because I was sort of like, well, I knew that I had all of this support and acceptance externally, just, you know, from the friends that I had and the community I was surrounded by. And so it wasn't like there was this outside pressure I was experiencing to be straight, but it was really about like, for me, like being able to connect with a part of myself that I had sort of been cut off from. And yeah, I think it's like, you know, I'm really grateful that also like the spectrum of what it means to be queer has become really expansive. And yeah, so much of that I feel like is, you know, just owed to like the many generations of queer people who have fought to create space and to, um, you know, yeah, just to create space for people to be queer. And so, yeah, as a younger person or a younger-ish person, I feel like I've had kind of more space to, you know, to be in like, yeah, just to be along that spectrum. Um, and yeah, I think like one, you know, thought I was having too around just like challenges around being Nikkei that I've been thinking about a lot, and that feels like related to the stuff around queerness in some way too, is just um, like how prevalent it sometimes feels like shame is in like Japanese culture or Japanese community, and how you know, like sometimes that's like important information, but it's so, yeah, I just feel like it's internalized in such harsh ways, and then we can so easily turn it both on ourselves and each other. So like how to just have more like space and gentleness around that, and also remember that, you know, in so many ways I feel like shame is sometimes instilled as a tool of social control, and so remembering kind of where that comes from too.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, thanks everyone for sharing kind of all these different strains of challenge. And just want to acknowledge all of you for like getting through these challenges to be here today. Wanted to shift a little bit to give people some room to talk about how Chicago has shaped you kind of in relation to these identities. And yeah, everyone doesn't necessarily have to answer this one, but I know Danielle and Marlene probably had some things to say.
I can start for sure. Yeah, growing up in Chicago, like I said, the building that I'm in right here, like we've been here for 3 generations in the same place. You know, my grandparents and the rest of their families were at mostly at Gila River internment camp in Arizona. And, you know, my grandfather was the first one to get out of camp like really early, like in early 1943. And, you know, he was able to get sponsored by the head of the Wicker Park Lutheran Church. And once he was established, you know, working here, carving gravestones, because that was the job he could get sponsored here. We don't have the letter, but he's basically proposed to my grandma, who we met in camp, to, you know, get married. At that point, you know, she could come out here. They were married at the same church where he was sponsored. Then the rest of the family could come bit by bit, except for the Issei, you know, parents, of course. They were in camp all the way till like 1946. But eventually everyone was here. And, you know, we still have their trunks from California to camp in our basement. Like we've been living on that history forever. But, you know, with all that history around me, I've had a little bit better of a window into our past, you know, and community more tangibly than most people have access to. Even, you know, friends just in the community or family moved out to the burbs. You know, it's a different perspective when you're just living like in that kind of history, especially in a multi-generational household. But definitely felt like, you know, growing up Nikkei in the 80s and 90s, kind of, as Yonsei, growing up after, you know, there was a bigger community. It's tricky. Like, you know, like we still went to the same, you know, everyone went to one of the 2 Japanese American dentists or optometrists or whatever, just because that's how everyone did it still. And we went to the festivals and did everything growing up. But it was this very small community that was also really divided. And it was really hard to understand how all the complexities of, you know, all these people who were living their lives, got interrupted by camp, and then ended up in Chicago, and then had to sort it all out. So it's understanding why there was possibly like, you know, generations of drama, and how they had ended up with all these churches and groups and communities. But it's been fascinating to see how after all these time and generations, you know, everything's kind of shaken out so that everyone can finally just get together and be part of the Nikkei community. It's been a long journey, you know. Add in all the, you know, Shin, Issei, and Nisei, when all the folks moved in. Like my best friend from school was, you know, was Japanese family that moved in the 80s, you know, to America, and seeing the new Japanese American and Japanese American communities getting along. That's new, you know. It's still a work in progress. As far as growing up queer in Chicago, I'm just less than you know, I'm like 15-minute walk from Boys Town, and going to things in Andersonville, and all the just visibly queer communities being here and Pride being right in my neighborhood, definitely helpful growing up.
Thank you. Marlene, did you want to add anything about kind of Chicago and how that shaped you?
Well, yeah, I think I sort of touched on that earlier when I was telling my story about sort of coming out and finding community. And, you know, like I said, I had removed myself from the Japanese community for many years. And what really prompted me to go back was my son, because I did want him to be a part of, you know, some things that I had experienced. I mean, we went to a Japanese church, you know, we did the festivals, and you know, going to a Christian church, and then, well, let me see, maybe I'm Buddhist instead, so I'm going to go to MBT or BTC for a while, and then I'm going to go back to the other church. But a lot of the churches, the Japanese churches and the temples, we had youth groups, and a lot of times we would do things with, you know, the other churches, or, you know, so it was community, and I think in certain ways, looking back, I wasn't sure. There was like something. I don't know what it is. It's something. Is it because I'm not all Japanese, or? And I don't think it was that. I think it was because I didn't realize that I was gay, queer, lesbian, um, until, you know, unfortunately, after I had gotten married, is when I realized it. Uh, so cutting myself off from this, but also having really an automatic uh, community and support group was, you know, it was heaven sent for me, because I'm somewhat of a social person. I am shy at the same time, but um, you know, I like the camaraderie of people, and I think that's why the sports, you know, really, really saved me, because I didn't know what was going to happen after I get divorced, and then, you know, what's the Japanese community going to think, and, you know, am I going to find friends over here, and I don't really know anyone, and so, but I did, and thank goodness that I did, and I have to give Chicago's kudos for that, because at that time, there was a big community and many things to do and participate in. So that's what I did, and I was a big part of it for a long time. And last maybe 3-4 years, you know, getting back into the Japanese community because of my son and wanting to expose him to those things, and seeing people that I hadn't seen for years and years, and them sort of, you know, like I had just seen them yesterday, which I was really, really surprised, you know, um, and emotional.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Marlene. I think a lot of people, because of queerness or other reasons, kind of have been separated from like the Japanese American community, and it's something I've definitely felt like it's meaningful when people get to reconnect. Yeah, so thank you. Kind of switching gears, since we're getting short on time, I wanted to ask people about the future a little bit. So when you think about the future, what are you imagining or wrestling with? And it can be kind of personal or collective or both.
I'll jump in, JJ. It's a great question, because today's conversations are just, to me, so absolutely inspiring. I'm 79 years old. And so there's like 50 to 60 years difference between me and Ty and Anne and Danielle, for example. And from all of the conversations, I'm just left with all this hope and the possibility of what might be for the future generations coming up, without all of the struggles and angst that certainly Marlene and I have faced, you know, being the older ones within this particular group. But it's the children of Marlene and of Danielle, who have this enormous benefit, given the parenting that they've got in a still hostile world, but getting better all the time. And it's that kind of hope for the future that I imagine for our community, the Nikkei and LGBTQ community merged with, I hope, a real positive outcome. Yeah, so, it's up to the Yonsei, Gosei, and beyond that to keep improving.
Thank you. Anne, do you want to share?
Yeah, I can share. Yeah, I think like, one of the things that we work towards in Nikkei Uprising is sort of a vision of a world that doesn't have incarceration and policing. And I think that's something that feels very like scary to a lot of people. But it's part of a really long-term vision about like how do we actually shift all of our resources towards towards like life and towards safety rather than towards these institutions that are about like um yeah, just like creating violence and taking resources away from the things that actually like support people surviving and thriving. And so I think like sort of, just like what is like the little pebble that we can kind of put towards that long-term vision, like what is the little piece that we can put in. That's something that I think about a lot. And then also, yeah, just like thinking from our conversation today, like how do we like work towards a world where people aren't being sort of left out or left behind, whether it's like, queer people being kind of locked out of Nikkei community, or whether it's people being left behind in the climate crisis. Just like, yeah, I mean, especially with the climate crisis, just knowing that like we're kind of facing this accelerating crisis that has already definitely started, but is like going to kind of multiply so many of the inequities and like the just many like environmental and health and economic crises in our world. And I feel like we started to see that with COVID too. Like how do we I don't know, just like how do we like kind of figure out how to like how to grow and how to kind of like continue to stay connected to like each other and ourselves and our values in a way that prepares us to live in that world. And I think that's a really hard question. Like it's one that I don't think there's an answer to, but yeah, it's just something that I'm thinking about.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is a really hard question, but I think really important.
Yeah, I think I can go right following that thought. Yeah, that's as far as the future goes, something all the time spent looking, searching through Japanese and queer history. It's like looking at the way that these two very different communities during times of great crisis, whether it's incarceration during World War II, or AIDS epidemic during the 80s. And it's like when you look at how people from really people from all over, from very different backgrounds within what's people have been sequestered into a community, they've been just tossed together, have to not just work out their differences, but figure out through just mutual aid and caring about each other, because the structures above them aren't going to help them out, how to give each other hope for a future. You see that with, post-war establishment of all the Japanese American community centers. When it comes, here in Chicago, like Marlene was talking about, like whether it's the, the different queer community, neighborhood places where people can rally together to work to make change. It's that kind of community's ability to come together to rise up stronger after. Like, that's something that we're going to need more of going forward. And just with the intersection of Nikkei and queer and mixed race identities, like as the community continues to grow and have more texture, more intersections, it's going to just make it stronger. So and yeah, I'm going to put a lot of pressure on my kiddo to do the work too. So but it's coming.
Thank you. Yeah, Marlene, do you want to jump in?
I don't know if you can see me. I don't know. I think I've pretty much. I don't know if I think about the future the same way maybe some of you younger ones do. More so, I think for my son, obviously, I'm not too concerned with myself because, like I said, once I got back into the Japanese community and how do I get rid of this here? And saw that most of the people that knew me before didn't have a problem with me. That took me a while to sort of get used to because every time I would first go to something, I'd be a little bit nervous. Oh, there's so and so, and should I go say hi and stuff like that. But then I just got to a point. I'm like, I'm just too old to worry about that kind of stuff, and just want my son to be in a world where he feels that he can be who he is, who he wants to be. If he wants to take up the sword for something, then go for it. And as far as the queer community, I mean, it did for a long time to me seem like it was getting better. But in the last couple of years, it just, seemed like we were going backwards. And Roy had said a couple of things about that earlier, So you have hope, and then your hope is kind of like, well, I don't know anymore, but you keep hoping and you keep trying to do what you can in your own little world. And, so it's interesting that with Cody having two moms, and he's 13, we have never felt any negativity towards us, and I don't know, again, he's in a lot of sports. So I don't know if I'm not sure what it is, but I'm so thankful that we haven't ever experienced any negativity from his classmates or kids that he does participate in with sports. So, for him, I think, and we tell him, you love who you love. He doesn't seem to think any differently that he's got two moms. So hopefully we're doing something right. And, then you have like this other worldly thing going on, like, oh my God, global warming. And when he's, 20 and 30 and 40, and how is the world going to be then? And it's sometimes it's just a little bit overwhelming. So we just try to do what we can do Oh, there we go. We just try to do what we can do and just work towards hope and work towards good.
Yeah, thank you so much, Marlene. And I want to pass it to Ty.
I really don't have too much to add on top of what everyone else has said already. I think I talked a bit about the future and some of the other questions already, but it really does seem so. I'm sorry, I'm at a loss for words with this question, but it seems so hard to imagine sometimes what a future looks like with a more for Nikkei queer people. I think the only thing that I want to add to this conversation, on top of the amazing things that have already been said, is just that I'm hoping that we can create space specifically for Nikkei queer people, because this call, and specifically the first time when everyone in the panel, when we met in the call last time, was kind of the first. I realized afterward it was the first time I'd ever been in a space that was just queer Nikkei people, and to have that in either in person or in more virtual settings is something that I really hope I can have at least once more in my life. Even though that sounds really dramatic, it's so difficult to even find spaces that are for the specific community. I have Nikkei communities through many different facets, and I have queer communities, but one that is specific for both is something that I hope to see at some point in the near future. I feel like it's attainable. That's all I want to add to this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Ty. And yeah, I think definitely like Okaidi is a place where there are like some very specifically Nikkei LGBTQ spaces, but yeah, it's also something that I think is really important. And yeah, so we only have a few minutes left, and thanks to Emma for sharing the questions that are in the chat, because I still can't see anybody or the chat. But one question in the chat is, what are ways that Nikkei people can show support for our Nikkei and LGBTQ plus family and friends? And I want to see if any of the panelists wanted to respond to that. Also, people can feel free to put questions in the chat, and then if you want to ask a question verbally, maybe Emma can let me know if someone's raising their hand. And we might only have time for like one question.
JJ, I'm going to read this one out loud because I can't type fast enough on my phone to pass it to you. We have a question. Do you have any queer Nikkei role models or people you look up to in the community?
I look up to JJ because she's the one that got me back involved in all this kind of stuff. Thank you, JJ.
Yeah, I'm so glad that. Also, just a reminder that I go by they them pronouns. But yeah, I'm so glad that we got to meet, and especially for the time that we got to go travel to Okaidi together a couple years back. Yeah, it's been so great to be connected. And yeah, I also look at all of the panelists as people I look up to in different ways.
I'll just jump in real quick and say I really like the work that Elliot Fukui does. He's like a trans like Nikkei organizer, but also it like does a lot of work around sort of like he identifies as like a psychiatric survivor, as a survivor of sort of the psychiatric system, and is really about like building sort of alternative models of what support around people's experiences that get labeled as mental illness can look like, and how to kind of build that in a grassroots way, like through community, rather than having to rely on these institutions that, you know, are supposed to help people, but often like end up causing a lot more trauma and harm. So yeah, I really really like the work that he does. And I have a friend who's she was actually the first queer Nikkei friend that I had ever made, or I think the first Nikkei friend maybe that I'd ever made. And she was definitely like kind of a older sister figure slash like role model when I was younger, but she's also a writer. She's an amazing, she used to be a playwright, but now she writes, I think, mostly films. And one of her screenplays that I really love is about like the intergenerational effects of the World War II incarceration. But like one of the things I really love about it is that she writes in like a Nisei, one of her characters is a queer Nisei woman, and it's about like their family and then her queer like Yonsei granddaughter, and just like this representation of like, yes, like queer people also existed, you know, generations ago, and like throughout the incarceration and all these other times. It's just that, you know, they weren't necessarily able to be out in the ways that that, you know, that my generation has had the same freedom to be out. But I love that, like the way that she kind of wrote that story in a way that just really reminded me of like, yeah, queer people and queer Nikkei people have always existed.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Did you want to share that person's name or no?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Her name's Kendra Arimoto. Here, I'll drop a link. It's really amazing.
Anyone else have queer Nikkei role models before we kind of close out?
Just say George Takei. Everybody knows him.
For sure.
Yeah.
I guess I'll close it out. I don't have any visual clues to tell if people are about to speak or not. But since we just have a couple minutes left, we'll wrap up the conversation here. Thank you so much to our panelists. I think I have a lot of kind of thinking to do after hearing your sharing, and a lot of gratitude for what you shared. Thank you to everyone who took the time to be here. There's a lot of links been dropped in the chat, and we will email those out in case you missed any of them, including how to stay connected to our panelists' endeavors, how to stay connected to JSC and to the OKAIRI conference that we mentioned in the beginning. Once again, if you are in a position to do so, please consider making a donation to JASC to help support what we do and keep programs like this free. And please be on the lookout for our Holiday Delight fundraiser coming on Saturday, November 13th. And if you're in Chicago, we'd love for you to come by our last JASC Fresh Market of the year, pick up some fresh produce and food and art. And that will be Thursday, October 28th from 4 to 6 p.m. in our building in Uptown. We hope to connect with all of you at more JSC events in the future, and have a good night.